Hey, this is Pastor Randy with Menorah Minute. Today I want to talk about a man that maybe you're familiar with, maybe you're not, but this man is called Rehoboam. And Rehoboam, he has quite a history within Scripture. So just to give you a little bit of a history here, we know that Solomon was over Israel, both sections of Israel, the northern and the southern sections of Israel. Or when Solomon died, we know that the southern and northern Israel split into two different countries. And one was governed by Rehoboam, which was Solomon's son, and that was the southern kingdom. And the northern kingdom then was governed by a man named Jeroboam. Now, what's interesting about the northern kingdom, and I don't know if you've ever looked into this, but they never had a good king. Every single king within the northern kingdom was a bad king and did what was evil in Yahweh's eyes. And Jeroboam, he propelled this. He started this pattern of sinning and doing what was evil against Yahweh. And I want to share with you just the account of the things some of the items he changed when he took over leadership. And by the way, the reason he did this is important. The reason he did this was out of fear. You see, he was afraid that the northern kingdom would go back to worship in the south where they should have worshiped. So he set up, Scripture shows, these pagan places to worship. Yahweh says you go to Jerusalem, but they weren't doing that. And he wanted to prevent that because he feared for his life. He was afraid. And that's what led to this sin. So it's just maybe that's another lesson here, is that when we're afraid and we do things out of fear, especially those things in opposition to Yahweh's word, that's not good. It's just not a good thing. And that's what Jeroboam did. But 1 Kings 12, and I'm going to read 32 here, verse 32. It says, "And Jeroboam ordained or feast in the 8th month." Now this feast was to mimic the feast in the 7th month, which is called the Feast of Tabernacles, which maybe for those who may be new to this program and this ministry, is not done away with. These feasts are still very much relevant and alive today in the New Testament. We know that Joshua kept this feast in John 7, so we see evidence of this feast even in the New Testament, along with all the other feasts. But anyway, getting back to the story here, so he ordains or replaces a feast, and it says in the 8th month, on the 15th day of the month, like it says unto the feast that is in Judah, and he offered upon the altar. So did he in Bethel, sacrificing unto the calves that he had made, and he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places which he had made. And we know that he made 2 golden calves, and he put one in Dan and one in Bethel. In fact, I've actually been to the one in the city of Dan. It is quite amazing because you can still see the platform where they worshipped and where the altar would have stood back during this time. And we know that, again, he was condemned for this, and he then began this trend of doing evil in Yahweh's eyes, not only by him, but every other king within the northern kingdom. So, as a minister, I like to apply Scripture. I think it's so important that we apply Scripture, that we read something and we ask, okay, how does that apply to you and I? So how does this apply to us? Well, it's real simple. When we do it Yahweh's way, we're blessed, and when we don't, we're not. And that's the lesson here. And we can apply this to so many facets of our lives, but when it comes to worship especially, and that's really what we're focusing on here, is worship. He took a feast of the 7th month on the 15th day of the month, and he ordained it in the 8th month. So it was a counterfeit feast day. And like so many other things Jeroboam did, it was a counterfeit system of worship. It says that he ordained the lowest of the people. Yahweh says to ordain the highest of the people. In the New Testament, we find that an elder or deacon has to be blameless or without sin in many ways. And so we find a great lesson here for us, and that is that as believers, we can't follow the ways of Jeroboam. And that is simply this: we worship as Yahweh says to worship. And we don't put in our own counterfeit worship. And sadly, so much of what we see within common worship today is counterfeit worship. Easter and Christmas and Halloween and Trinity. So many of these beliefs that we find within the church today was borrowed from paganism. And it's not hard to find. And I would encourage you, if you don't believe me, and I would encourage you, don't believe me. Don't take my word for this. You look into it, kind of like the Noble Bereans. And Paul was going to the Noble Bereans in the New Testament, and he was preaching to them. And instead of simply saying, you know what, Paul said this, the Scripture says that they searched the Scriptures daily, proving what Paul was saying. So I would encourage you to do the same thing with me. Fact check me. Fact check me. Look into it. Because I'm telling you now, when you do it, when you look into these things, whether again it's Easter or Christmas or any of the other beliefs that we find this crept into the church. They're not right. And, as we find in Jeremiah 10 verse 2 is a great passage. Jeremiah 10 verse 2 says, learn not the way of the heathen. Really, very short, very succinct, but such an important passage, because the message is the same message we find here in 1 Kings 12. And that is, we as believers cannot accept counterfeit worship. We can't accept worship that man has altered or changed. So I would encourage you, if you're new to this ministry, again, new to the program, I would encourage you to look into these things. And even if you're not new, maybe you're a seasoned believer, listen, we can always learn more. And I would encourage everybody to really sit back and examine what you believe and ask, do we find these beliefs in Scripture? And if not, or we need to change. So again, that's the message I'm going to give you today. As believers, we can't do like Jeroboam. We can't mimic. We can't change our own worship. We can't alter from what Yahweh says within His Word. We have to be aligned with what He says and not what we want to do. And when we do that, we're going to be blessed. If we don't do that, we're going to be cursed. So it's a really important message and lesson we find through this man named Jeroboam. So I hope this quick Menorah Minute has been a blessing to you. I would encourage you to subscribe if you haven't, to like the video, maybe even share with a friend. And with that, I would just wish you all a great day, and may Yahweh bless you. Bye-bye.